to do something sincerely, even with a small budget, if you're serious, if you have little vision, you can create something wonderful in cinema. I always used to we used to refer one film. Whenever you feel that you are tired, go and see Bicycle Thief. An incredible film was made in a shoestring budget, and that created history in the cinema. That was his Ray's very favorite example. My previous fiction films where I have tried to make a quest and to rediscover my subcontinent in many layers, because Indian subcontinent has a different caste and creed, people from different economic group. My prime concern was to know the farmers, the fishermen, the gypsies, and the people who live almost on the brink, who move around from one place to another, and that was my quest. But this film is exclusively about my own milieu, middle class, upper middle class, or I've seen my family, the effect of fading aristocracy. So I thought to express my feelings about my feelings of my friends, my family, and I've tried to put everything in the perspective of the time. The blindness, or the old mansion, or even the beautiful forest in North Bengal, in the countryside, there in a way says about the modern allegories of our intellectual world, of this educated society in Bengal. I didn't really want to tell a single story, because I told you it's about the feelings. There are elements of many stories, and I was wondering what kind of form I should select for this movie. Then I thought that symphonic form would be the right form for my movie, in a symphony where you deal with a phrase, and as you go on changing tempo from the first movement to second movement, you go on, and finally there's a recapitulation. So I thought, the symphonic structure would be the right structure for telling my feelings about my family, my friends, my time. Well, of course, there's a definite, very strong effort of globalization or the market economy in our society, particularly the urban society, where you find that people are a little confused about this globalization. In my opinion, globalization you cannot stop, economic globalization. But what about cultural globalization? I think it's an utopia. When I look back to my own subcontinent, I can find there are many layers. You cannot define Indian subcontinent in one dimension. There are many dimensions, because in economy, in the culture, in customs, many layers exist. So it's very difficult for India to change overnight. Or not only India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the entire subcontinent, Ceylon, for instance. If you go to the interior villages in the subcontinent, you don't find any impact of globalization, but the impact is there on the educated class, on the middle bourgeoisie. They are really shaken, and they are trying to change their life very fast, because they have the access, they're the privileged, so they can change fast if they wish to. Well, at the end, when she finds that a stranger writes the poem he dictates after 17 years, it's not a question of jealousy. It's a feeling of a woman the woman who had infatuation for this man, a very strong relationship. Once she said that, why don't you write? You go on telling, I'll write. He said, it's impossible, I can't write anymore. So it's a heart breaks. It's a tragedy for her. it's not the question of jealousy, but the tragedy for her. Well, you know, I don't know whether if she finds in the blind boy a new life. Perhaps not. It's very complex. And you know, it's our social taboo that we create certain kind of quarter. That's from one quarter you move to another, and from another quarter you can go to somewhere else. But perhaps that is not human life. It's much more complex. Even physically, when you depart, when your story is complete, you almost exhaust yourself, but it remains in your mind, all the relationship. No relationship is completely destroyed. It remains. I wanted my protagonist to say, love is a fade, at the same time it's a mirage. Well, thanks, Italo. Actually, first of all, it's very difficult to define a film. Of course, the theoreticians, they have defined this is linear, this is non-linear, this is narrative, this is non-narrative. I think cinema is with all. It's a complete form where you can combine everything. You can combine real, unreal, and surreal. But the tendency in India, as you have mentioned in the Bollywood film, or even in regional Bengali, regional cinema, to tell a story with some elements, that's all. But I'm sure that for the last 100 years, especially in Europe, people have done incredible experiment with cinematic expression, that cinema can combine everything. But I'm sure that since this film was unbelievable, it was a big commercial success in my province, I didn't expect it. So I'm sure the young generation, they are getting a little tired of the linear cinema, or so-called storytelling. They want to see something beyond. I'm very happy the film was accepted very well at the box office. It's like that, you can combine everything. And then I appreciate that now, in the usual Indian cinema or the Bollywood films, it's a formula, accepted formula. Yeah. So when this film was a success in box office, a lot of people are very hopeful in Bengal. People are thinking seriously about cinema. The young generation are enjoying the film. Actually, a very interesting experience. We were touring, myself and my main actor, just to see the reaction in the theaters in Calcutta and the suburbs. In one theater, I found a long queue. I asked some young people that when they're coming out from the theater, tell me your reaction. Oh, we have liked it, but we didn't understand anything about it. So maybe the magic of cinema has something else beyond understanding. For the Bollywood cinema, which is produced in Bombay, they have taken Hindi language as a means of communication. But the language Hindi belongs to northern India. But in Bollywood films, in most of the films, except there are a few exceptions, you don't find the culture and ethos of northern India. So for me, if I make a film in northern India or in Bihar, of course, I've made earlier Bar and other films. I made in Hindi because they speak Hindi language. If I make a film in South India, I'll make a film in their own language. I'm not constrict. I don't want to constrict myself within my own province because India is huge. Our subcontinent is huge. So wherever I get my feeling, I will go and make film in that particular language. Not exactly, because Ray made two films in Hindi, and he thought that he can't write the dialogue. That was his problem. But I think you can get very good collaborator. Suppose if I make a film in Italy, I'm sure that I will take a collaborator. It's very important, and it's similar wherever you go in India or elsewhere in Asia or in Europe, you have to take a collaborator and trust him or her. Because, it is a very internalized film, and for a blind person, sound is very important. Sound coming from different directions, right, center, left, surround, from the back. So I thought instead of showing visually Calcutta, I would use the soundtrack, the train nearby, or the other traffic sound, or the ambience of the city from the protagonist's point of view. That was the whole idea of making the film inside a mansion and few views of the city at a glance. I'm sure that most all of you must be knowing the name of our great poet, Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore died in 1941, died with the bitter experience of the world, the ravages of the Second World War. Before his death, he had given a lecture in the town hall of Calcutta, a historical lecture, and the name of the lecture is Crisis of Civilization, where he tried to point out the fact that I was so inspired for the last 70 years with the great Western civilization, and I was so proud of this, the progress of civilization, but what has happened? So much materialistic grabbing has caused a terrible war, and hundreds and thousands of people were killed. So perhaps we are entering into the world of great crisis of civilization. And that was his observation in 1941. And I think 60 years after his observation, we have come to the worst situation where powerful people, now I believe all over the world, people who are in power, they are mediocre. Now, the thinkers, intellectuals are estranged or isolated from the power game. That is the real tragedy of today's world. And this kind of violence and counter-violence will bring a real violent clash of civilization, no doubt of it. So we are passing through a real crisis, and I'm sure that it is a time to look back, and we all of us who are involved in art and culture, are people who are involved elsewhere, must think about how we can bring back compassion which can save our human race. Just imagine, that's why I referred in my film when he was reading the newspaper that 400 peasants committed suicide in many parts of India are found on the 5th page of a newspaper. And cricket is very popular now, cricket game, which is not very popular in Europe but in England and elsewhere. It takes the front line, headline of the newspaper. So what does it prove? The insensibility and indifference of people everywhere, in the media and everywhere. Very unfortunate. More important than 400 lives. It reflects the mood of a very glitzy time, but I'm sure that the progress of human civilization so far has created a strong root, and it cannot be uprooted so fast. So there's a great hope. Well, in the discussions, he has expressed some possibilities, because, perhaps that's why communism failed in our subcontinent. It didn't work. Perhaps it was imposed from outside. And as we see now, perhaps communism was the utopia of the socialist, as we find nowadays. This unipolar world is also a utopia of the capitalist. So in between only ism exists as humanism.